Hello, Dreamcatchers, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Writer's Haven. I am here with filmmaker Anthony Grippa, and we are here today to talk about his film Aleppo and also just basically his filmmaker's journey. Welcome to the Writer's Haven.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we're here at the Annapolis Film Festival where Anthony is premiering his U.S. premiere for his film Aleppo. Tell us a little bit about the experience so far here at the Annapolis Film Festival.
My experience has been fantastic. I mean, this is a beautiful city. It's my first time here. There's so much history here, and it just seems like a really great place to premiere a story about a global issue in the world and how it relates to, people living in America. So happy to be here.
Okay, so tell us about your film and what propelled you to make it.
It's called Aleppo. It's a short film about a Syrian-American doctor who lives in New York but goes back to Aleppo to help her people in an underground hospital in Aleppo during the war. It's sort of her... Most of the movie takes place when she's back home in New York, sort of recovering from a traumatic brain injury that left her with a neurological condition called prosopagnosia, otherwise known as face blindness, so she can't recognize people's faces anymore. And it's a movie about her search for a new identity in the aftermath of war. And, I was really interested in, to sort of circle back here, like I wanted to tell a story about the Middle East for a really long time. I had been making movies about my own identity and exploring aspects of my own history and my own life and relationships that I had through my early adulthood. And about 5 years ago, I think I hit a wall creatively, and I was kind of lost, and I didn't really know what story I wanted to tell anymore because I had made a couple of features and a bunch of shorts that kind of dealt with issues that I had been dealing with personally. And after my last feature film that I wrote and directed called Half Brother, I was working on a couple different projects and they weren't really working out, and I was kind of like frustrated creatively because I wasn't sure where to go from here. And then I kind of took a break from filmmaking for a little bit. I had studied directing at the American Film Institute in Los Angeles, and my life was just very much about what's the next project? What am I doing next? I have to keep going. I have to keep the momentum going. And so it was difficult to sort of be in a position where I found myself, I didn't know what the next thing was. And I kind of had to step back and be like, okay, I'm just going to just live my life and try to get inspired again. And it was during that time where I picked up a still camera and I became really interested in photography. Documentary photography in particular, and I had been following a lot of photographers that were covering the Syrian refugee crisis. And, I was just looking at these images, not necessarily looking for a story to tell, but I was just interested in what was going on. And it kind of, as a still photographer, it's just so much easier to sort of get out into the world and find a story to tell. You just, making a movie requires so many people and so much money, and so much time, and even a small independent film requires so many resources. And I think I just really wanted to just tell a story. Like, I just wanted to step outside my door and find a story to tell, and photography really let me do that. And so that was sort of my entry point into this world of Syria. And the more I had sort of learned about it and done research, I started reading about doctors and the great lengths they would go to save lives during the war. And also the great lengths that they would go to survive because they were targets of the government, because they were helping members of the opposition. So that's how the regime would justify bombing hospitals and targeting doctors, because they were considered terrorists in the government's eyes. And it was just so compelling to read stories about doctors who couldn't reveal their identity to people because they'd become a target and their families would become targets. They would set up hospitals anywhere they could, in abandoned buildings, in people's homes, even on the street. Ambulances would have to be covered in mud to avoid detection from the air because helicopters and jets would sort of follow where the ambulances were going, and that's how they would know where the hospitals are. Because so many of the hospitals, moved to underground spaces to avoid detection, obviously. And so once these jets and helicopters found the ambulances, then they can find the hospitals. And I just thought I just thought it was such a compelling world, and I thought, man, people need to know what these people are doing, these courageous people, because so many were forced to flee that there just weren't that many doctors left. I mean, there would be veterinarians who would stay in Aleppo to help people, dentists who would stay to help people. They would be Skyping with doctors all over the world trying to figure out how to treat injuries because, dentists obviously aren't necessarily trained to treat shrapnel wounds or, stuff like that. So I just thought, wow, this is so compelling. This is such a new form of trauma medicine that I thought this was a story that really needed to be told. And so that's sort of when I took a deep dive into the research, and my producer and I partnered with the Syrian-American Medical Society to help produce this movie. And, through that relationship, I got to interview a lot of doctors who worked in Aleppo, some of whom couldn't reveal their identities to me as I was interviewing them because it was that dangerous for them to show who they were. So it was just really interesting process because most of my career up until that point, I had been sort of, as I said, exploring aspects of my own identity. And here I am making this movie about a different culture and, doctors. And I'm not obviously I didn't know anything about being a doctor and medicine. And, so it was just a continual process of discovery and learning. And, I got to learn so much about, this part of the world and this group of people and what they do. And through that, I felt like I learned a lot about myself and what I'm capable of and the types of stories that I now want to tell. So it was pretty amazing, life-changing experience.
Wow, it sounds like a life-changing experience. You just kind of came full circle into who you are as a person and definitely who you are as a filmmaker. Sounds like a lot of research went into that. Can we talk a little bit about that process of how that came together for you?
Sure. I mean, I literally would read anything I could get my hands on, any article, book. I mean, I've read so many books and just really watched so many videos through the partnership with SAMS. They sent me a lot of their videos that they had of
Who's SAMS?
a Syrian-American Medical Society. So they have videographers and journalists on the ground in Syria covering the war, and so I had access to a lot of videos, so I got to see the scope of the destruction and what these hospitals were like in a way that most people never see because some of it is just frankly too gruesome to broadcast. So it was just trying to learn as much as I could, and just the interviews were probably the most informative because I got to ask people specific questions about their personal experience in Aleppo, and really seeing firsthand the trauma that victims of this war face, but also these doctors. I mean, a lot of these people working in a conflict zone, they're surrounded by violence and death constantly. A lot of them suffer, PTSD from it, and I felt like this would be another way to tell a war story because so many movies and TV shows about war are focused on service members of the military, men in particular.
And you got to meet some of these people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I met a lot of them through SAMS. A lot of them live overseas, so I would Skype with them, and they, served as advisors for me as we made the project. And I continued talking to them as we developed it into a feature. And so it was just trying to learn as much as I could. It was about opening myself up to everything I could. I just wanted to sort of absorb it all and just try to put myself, as a storyteller, I wanted to put myself in their shoes and try to empathize with them and their, and in a way that hopefully an audience could empathize with them as well.
To bring off this authenticity to the story.
Right. Yeah, it was really important to make it as authentic and true to life as possible because, this is an ongoing conflict. And about 3 weeks ago, my producers and I were at a benefit for an organization called Med Global in Chicago, and we got to meet so many of these doctors who work overseas in conflict zones like Yemen, all over the place. And this story really matters to those people. It really is important to do it right. And so I felt a big responsibility to make it as real and authentic as I could. And we had so much support from the Syrian-American Medical Society, and We had a lot of Syrian doctors on set with us, sort of consulting with us, not only in terms of like the language, because there is some Arabic in the film, but also just the way they work with patients and the treatments that they do and the injuries that the characters of the movie suffer. So it was really important to get that right. And yeah, I mean, it was amazing. It was great.
The messaging for the film, at what point did you have a very clear vision about what the message was that you wanted to convey in this film? Was it in the researching? Was it at the very beginning when the idea came, or did it just kind of evolve as you were making the film?
It definitely evolved as we were making the movie. To me, filmmaking is a process of discovery. It's a continual process of discovery. So through the research, you're learning and discovering more about your story, and in the writing, you're discovering more about the story. And so it was very much a process that evolved over a long period of time as I was learning more about this culture and this war and about what doctors would actually do. So it wasn't until late in the script writing phase that it kind of all came together. And, you know, I was attracted to this condition, face blindness, because I thought, well, I'd never seen a movie about someone who's face blind before. I didn't even know about face blindness until about four or 5 years ago. And I thought it was such an interesting condition to explore visually.
How did it come to you? Like, how did you experience that illness?
No, it's funny. I was talking to my wife about this the other day, and she you know, got annoyed that I wasn't giving her credit for coming up with the idea, because she heard a story on the radio about a woman who was face blind, and she told me about that, and then I listened to it. I think it was a story about on NPR, and yeah, that's sort of where I first encountered it, and I thought it was just so interesting. How do you live life, you know, not being able to recognize people? You know, if I got up and left the room right now and came back, I wouldn't know who you were. And I thought, amazing. And it's sort of, so that was something I really wanted to explore. So it was kind of a process of trying to figure out how do I work this into the story about Syria and these doctors. And you know, millions of Syrians were forced to flee their country. So many people were forced to take on a new identity. Like, you know, who are you after that experience? Like, you're forced to flee to another country where you don't speak the language. You have to leave everything behind. You don't have any money. Most of your family is dead because they were murdered by a government killing their own people. Who are you at that point? You know, when you look at yourself in the mirror, do you even recognize yourself anymore? Because so much has changed, and you're forced to take on this new identity as this person living in this foreign place. And I thought, you know, that's sort of what people with face blindness deal with. Is, you know, some people are born with it, other people are sort of acquire it through things like brain trauma, and you're forced to take on this new identity. So I thought this would be an interesting metaphor for what Syria is going through and what Syrian people are going through, is being forced to take on this new identity. So the story is about this woman just trying to figure out who she is now after this traumatic experience. You know, it's a story about a woman who doesn't quite feel at home anywhere anymore. You know, she doesn't quite feel at home in New York, and her home country has been destroyed, so she doesn't have a home anymore. So I thought that was an interesting subject matter that I felt like everybody could relate to. You know, I wanted it to be something that everyone could relate to, so you could empathize with the Syrian woman and not look at her or Syrians in general as the other. You know, I wanted people to empathize with her and try to understand from her point of view. You know, I just want my life back. And I think that's what so many Syrians want, is they just want their country back. They want their homes back. They want their lives back. They want their families back, and they can't. Exactly. So I just feel really fortunate to have had the opportunity to tell the story, and I hope in some small way, you know, when we look back on this war years from now, I think people will look to the stories that are told. And I hope that in some small way this story can serve as a record for what doctors went through. And so, yeah, I mean, that's sort of the whole thing for me.
Okay, what's next? Do you have any other films that are along those lines, or just what other projects do you have coming up?
Well, we're developing this short into a feature-length film, so the hope is in the next 18 months we'll be filming the feature version. And then beyond that, I'm working with the same producer to develop a television series about a photojournalist who covered the Iraq War for 7 years. So it's based on the life of a photojournalist who covered the Iraq War. So we're working on that now as well. So, but I'm really drawn to to stories of global conflict and global issues. I feel like I get so much out of it because I learn so much, and I get to meet people I would never otherwise have met. And so that's what attracts me to stuff like that. Is I studied history in college. I've always been interested in historical issues, and this gives me an opportunity to make some kind of contribution, even if it's just artistically, to stories that are being told about these global issues that are going to resonate for years to come. And so that's sort of what I'm trying to do now.
Okay. What advice would you give to filmmakers that are looking into whether it's narrative or documentary films, just starting out on their journey? I right now am making movies about Syria and telling stories about Iraq, but you don't have to go across the world to tell stories. You can find interesting stories to tell in your own backyard. So I would suggest, and I teach photography and film, and so I tell students all the time, like, you don't need to travel far to make interesting work. You just need to know, you just have to sort of observe your own community and your own world and find something that sparks an interest in you. What is something that you don't know about that you want to learn more about? Is there someone in your community who has an interesting story to tell? Because there are stories everywhere, and you don't have to travel all over the world to some exotic location to make an interesting film. You probably know people in your own community or in your own family, or maybe you yourself have an interesting story to tell that no one else knows. And no one's going to tell your story the way you will. That's the key thing to remember is no one... You are unique, and your voice is unique, and no one is going to tell your story better than you can. So find that, however you can, and then once you have that, it's just a matter of acquiring the tools necessary to get it done. And these days you obviously don't need a lot of money to find a camera and some sound and some lights and, just go make your movie. I mean, get some people together and do it. I mean, that's what I did. And so many filmmakers I know did. You just kind of have to get scrappy and try to figure out any way you can to tell your story. So don't wait. Don't wait.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. What would you say was the biggest challenge for you in making the film, Aleppo?
Wow. There were so many challenges. It was such an ambitious movie and such a big movie. I guess the biggest challenge was just representing the world the way it deserved to be. That was my biggest priority. I mean, there were a lot of... Yeah, exactly. I mean, there were a lot of physical challenges with the production. We were shooting in a working hospital. There were Arabic speakers on set. I don't speak Arabic, so it was challenging to work with actors who were speaking a different language. All of that was really challenging, and stuff like that is hard on any movie. But for me, the hardest part was committing to telling a story that I didn't know that much about going into it. Like I said, it was just a process of discovery through the research, through talking to people, through reading everything I could, through just absorbing everything and just being open to all this information. I didn't know if I was going to get it right.
Kind of building the plane while you were flying it.
Exactly, which is really scary, because you're asking all these people to come on this journey with you. And I had to sort of, as the director, I had to be the one to say, it's worth it. It's a worthwhile project. And it's not about me, it's bigger than me. It's about these people and their suffering right now, and trying to get the world to respond, because humanity turned a blind eye to what was happening in Syria, and the world didn't come together to help Syrians, so it was important to us to sort of scream it from the mountaintops, like, look at what's happening to the world. This is why we tell stories. This is why we make movies. They could really, at their best, movies can serve as a record for what happened, so that we won't forget the next time a war like this happens, and there will be a next time, unfortunately. So that was the challenge, was just making sure I did it justice. That was really hard. But I think, the response has been really great so far. We've shown the movie to Syrian doctors, and it's been overwhelming to sort of hear their response. And so I'm just really grateful.
Anthony, given the political climate that we're in right now, and your film and all that your film really encapsulates, what are your thoughts about its impact right now?
Well, I never set out to make a political film, but you know, it's kind. I guess it's kind of everything is political, I guess, these days. So, but as I was telling the story and working with the writers on the script, you know, we wanted to make a movie about humanity and the goodness in humanity. And we wanted to tell a story about a woman who was overcoming tremendous obstacles in the face of great danger, persevering through that. So that was sort of the narrative thrust for me for the story. It was never a political movie, of course. You know, we're obviously really concerned about the way Syrians and refugees have been represented in the media. And so, you know, there is a sense of, you know, we want to change that narrative. You know, we want to, you know, we should be welcoming these people, in my opinion, because they need help. I mean, what a lot of people don't understand is that most of the Syrian refugees are middle class and upper middle class people, you know, who have everything taken away from them. You know, they're just like you and me, and so those people need help. Those are victims of war, and so it's hard to sort of see what's happening in the world and see how. You know, the forces of evil are sort of overtaking the forces of good, and I hope this movie is. I hope the message of this movie is you know, we're all in this together, and like this is a story about a woman who is just like anyone else who's just trying to figure out what to do now after she's lost so much, and I think that's a universal truth that everybody can relate to, and so. The hope is that you don't see her as the other. You don't see her as an immigrant. You just see her as a woman, as a person, as a doctor who's trying to figure out who she is now. And through that experience, I hope the audience can sort of look at what's happening in Syria and say, we need to do more. You know, what can I do to help? Maybe it's donating money to a medical organization like the Syrian-American Medical Society. You know, maybe it's just posting on Facebook or Twitter. Maybe it's just reading more about it and trying to have a deeper understanding of what's going on in the world rather than just listening to the noise.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Anthony, for coming by the Writers Haven. And thank you, Writers Haven viewers, for stopping by and listening to our continued conversation with the filmmakers here at the Annapolis Film Festival. Until next time, catch fire on purpose.
Annapolis is such a beautiful city, and yeah, it's been so fun. The film festival is obviously really popular. I'm so excited that there's such a great turnout. So yeah, I'm looking forward to tonight.
We're a beautiful town on the water, so our festival comes with a lifestyle, and it comes with a walkability that you can go to different venues and walk past restaurants and really, you know, take it all in on foot.
I think a festival is going to give people opportunity to see lots of films that they wouldn't otherwise see. You might have never heard of it. You know, you're breaking through on Netflix with hundreds of films, and so this gives people that really like cinema a chance to come and sort through the various films and see films that they might not have even heard of before.
First of all, it brings the community together. You get to see the best films that are being made, like they're cutting edge. They're happening right now. So it's great to have a place where filmmakers can showcase their work to a larger audience.
And so it's very exciting to come to Annapolis and do a Q&A and get to have that conversation, because ultimately I think that's why we were interested in making the movie, was to begin a conversation.
And I think that going to different festivals and seeing the excitement that people have for film and for storytelling and storytellers, I think is so important.
Storytelling is something that just we as humans have done for, millions of years, and more stories need to get out there.
The Writers Haven Show was created to showcase the passion, process, and projects of writers of literature, television, and film. Stream our shows on iHeartRadio, Spreaker, iTunes, Sonos, SoundCloud, Spotify, Alexa, and YouTube. We drop new episodes every week, so subscribe and never miss a show. Find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr at Author V. Helena, and visit our website at www.writershavenshow.com. See you in the Haven, and until next time, catch fire on purpose.
What are you going to make of me?
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Open up your books to page 360.
Did you just look at your phone while you was in class? You played yourself.
Talking about inspirational quotes.
You gotta believe in yourself. Don't ever play yourself. The key is to make it, so make it.
Louise, can you give me an example of an inspirational quote?
Don't play yourself. The key is to make it.
And who said that?
I did. Now that's a major key alert.
Learn the real major keys to getting to college at getschool.com.
Green red hat. Oops. Red shirt, blue shirt, yellow shirt. Oops. Yellow pants, red pants, green pants. Oops.
Don't wait. Communicate. Make your emergency plan today.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.